Good afternoon, bee people. Jason here from Bohemia Bees, and we are in the apiary. We are working on our winter prep for going into our 2020 winter season. Honeybees, as you see in some of our previous videos, they don't typically hibernate. They do cluster in a ball. They keep themselves warm. The queen will continue to lay her brood in a small brood nest, and the bees that are there that are clustered together around that nest will have to keep that brood warm. They don't usually go out when it's below 50-degree temperature. That's 50-degree Fahrenheit. They won't fly. Their body structure, their exoskeleton, and their bee muscles really kind of atrophy up, so to speak. So in the winter time around here on the Eastern Shore, it does get pretty cold. Bees aren't really concerned with the cold, but they are concerned with the moisture. So when you have a fluctuation of moisture up and down during your winter months, that can create a lot of problems for bees. So we do a lot of things here on the Eastern Shore, in addition to our normal prep going into winter, to make sure that we can manage that moisture inside the colony as best as possible. The bees do a good job of it, but sometimes they need a little help. So here on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, I'm working on a few colonies, and I'm going to give you a tip. We had a series last year that we did for prepping your bees for winter. This is just another version of that. You can go back and look at some of our last year's YouTube videos in which we talk about the steps for prepping a colony for winter. This is just the first step that we do, and we always like to continue to freshen our videos, talk about things that we learned in prior years, and if we find things that don't work, we'll kind of change them up or tweak them a little bit. So thanks for following us on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and see when we update our videos. If you're a beekeeper and you're following us, naturally this is just our way of doing it. It's not a how-to. It's more of just a how we do it. Right now I've got these colonies that we're working on, and I'm going to go ahead and do the first step that I always consider in bee winter preparation, which is to put our shim on, and that's for the mountain sugar shim, and I'll talk about that in a second. Before you get to this point, there's a couple things that you should have already done. You want to make sure that your colony is strong, right? So it needs to be strong, and in order to do that, you need to make sure that you've done your tests for your mites, and you've also done your treatments for your mites. Mites can kill a nest pretty quickly, or a brood nest or a colony of bees pretty quickly through the winter if they're stressed with those mites. So you want to make sure you've done that, you've treated, and you also have strong genetics within your colonies to help kind of mitigate or get rid of those mites, whether you use an integrated pest management system with a screen bottom board and so on and so forth. A couple things to note here on the Eastern Shore of Maryland: it does get pretty cold. The temperature does fluctuate. We do get a lot of moisture, and as I mentioned, bees cluster in a ball. They don't really hibernate, but they do cluster in a ball to keep that brood nest warm. The queen will continue to lay. She'll slow down all the way until the winter solstice. It's about the 20th, 21st of December, and then she'll start to pick back up again as it progresses towards spring. Once she's reached that winter solstice, it's a little bit more brood a day, more eggs a day she'll lay, and then as she reaches spring and the nectar flow and the pollen starts to emerge on some of the flora, early pollen, early nectar, that's when the hives will really kick into gear, and she'll begin to really start to lay lots of some brood every single day. But the colonies I have in front of me, again, we've treated, we've done what we needed to do to make sure that the mite load counts are very, very low. We also make sure that our colony bee volume is very high, right? So that's the key with a good cluster, is a lot of bees within that colony. You don't want a lot of extra space. I'm going to be doing a video here shortly to talk about bee clustering in the winter and why it's important to manage the space in your hive, right? So most people like to put, double deeps and a medium and several other boxes within their colony. We manage single deeps here for a reason. One, they're easier to inspect to make sure that they're progressing, and we're actively splitting our colonies as we need to. If we couldn't do that, we might put a double deep, and we might do a larger setup. But when we have a single deep, we can manage them easier. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next video. There's, I might put a link in the description or come back and do that once we do the video. But we do the single deeps today so that we can continue to manage our colonies going into winter. And it gives them all the resources they need. They need anywhere from 80 to 100 pounds of resources going into winter, right? Whether that's a nectar-based honey or whether that's a sugar-based honey, right? Or a fructose-based honey. They need that. They need pollen. They need good pollen stores, right? There's still a small amount of pollen. You see There's some flora behind us that they're still getting pollen off of and bringing that red, or not the red, but the it looks like there's some orange and yellow pollen they're bringing in from the small white flowers you see behind me. And then, you know, towards the goldenrod is what you're also seeing out right now. So that's your ragweed. So we are still seeing pollen coming in, and they're putting those stores away, or they're feeding the brood nest, the winter bees that she's laying right now. There should not be many drones left in your colonies. If you have a lot of drones, you probably have a laying worker, and that's a whole other discussion, a whole other video that we can talk about a laying worker and how to fix a laying worker. But if you have a lot of drones, or really any drones at this point, by mid-October, late October, on the eastern shore of Maryland or in the region of the Northeast, probably not a good deal. So the first step we need to do is naturally get our bees taken care of from a bee volume. We make sure that we get the bee volume up high enough so that they can build that good solid cluster going into winter. And then we also are feeding pollen patties right now. Even though there is pollen out there, there's other nutrients we want to get to the bees. We use the Pro DFM, or we use some of the other probiotic type, and we had a video on that I'll put a link in the description, that we're using. Super DFM, I believe is what it's called. We're using that, and we're seeing a lot of good success with those here in the apiary. So let's go ahead and dig into the hive and let's see what we got, and what I would do in putting the shim on is the first step. You can see what's going on in this colony right here. There's a lot of bees on approximately 8 frames. Okay, we have got a double. It's like a 2-gallon or a 1.5 gallon feeder that's internal to the bees. This helps prevent the robbing. We use that a lot here in the apiary. We use a lot of internal feeders to prevent robbing. We also have 2 pieces of pollen patty, one here and one here. We broke it up into smaller pieces so that the bees can get at the pollen patty faster. You don't want to put that big solid 1-pound patty across the middle, only because the bees can't get to it and eat it fast enough, and then the small hive beetles will start to use it as a resource and either eat it or lay eggs in it. So by putting it into smaller pieces, you still get the amount of pollen patty you need into the colony, but then the bees can actually attack it from more sides, more surface area for them to eat it. And you'll put them kind of staggered across the whole brood's nest and then really the center of the box to allow the bees to really get that nutrients and put it right down into the brood nest. And they're coming over here bringing, you know, the feed as well and filling up those frames, and those open combs, the open spots. They're going to fill it up with that resource that we poured in here. We're using a Pro Suite actually. A Pro Suite is to help them because it has micronutrients in it that we want to give them as well. So when putting a sugar shim on, or shim on, the reason why we want to do that is because bees naturally will be making propolis this time of year. They'll be going out and harvesting some of the various saps from trees and various other types of plant type sap and even nectar, some nectar that is still around. And they'll be using that pollen, or that nectar, to create a sappy type substance called propolis. And propolis is antibacterial, antifungal. It's really just a benefit to the hive. It's like a spackle on your walls when you have drywall. And they do that on the insides of their cavity of their hive. They're going to spackle it up and they're going to coat the frames with it. It's almost like a cleansing antibiotic across the whole colony. It seals the colony up. It closes up any gaps for any airflow that may come through. They're doing that right now to get ready for winter. So notice when I grab this inner cover here, you know, I can't lift it up because it's stuck down. Okay, if I came along in a couple weeks and I put my sugar shims on and closed them up and it's already winter and it's cold out and it's not even enough temperature and they're not out foraging for propolis, they're not going to have enough propolis to seal those shims up. So I do it now so that I have a chance to actually have them put some good propolis on those shims for winter. So I'm going to take this inner cover and I'm going to pop it off, and you can see the small level of propolis that they just started to build around the outside. We're going to set that to the side. And we're going to take our shim, and this is just a standard 2-inch shim. There's nothing special about it. Some shims you can drill a hole for an extra top, but I'm going to use my screened inner cover again with that at that top entrance and keep that on there. I'm just going to take my shim and I'm going to put it on top of my hive. I'm going to square it up. right where I want them to start gluing it down. And then I'm going to take my inner cover and I'm going to put it back on for now. All that's doing is it gives an opportunity for the bees to start to get at these little gaps that this wood imperfections may not have perfect. They're gonna start to work the edges of that shim and start to seal up any airflow gaps that they are seeing within the colony. It helps to get a head start on that. Really, that's it. I mean, there's not much to it when you're starting to prep for winter, but that's my first step beyond the other steps that I'll do, and we'll have other videos about that in the series. But if you remember, you know, making a strong colony going into winter has a strong colony going out of winter. How do you get a strong colony? You mitigate your pests. You make sure they have enough amount of stores, right? And then you give them the things that they need to help become a strong colony. And it may not be what you think they need, but the bees will then take the things that you've given them and use it to their advantage. So I put a sugar shim on, and a sugar shim is really just an extra amount of stores of dry powdered sugar, or dry, not powdered sugar, but dry granulated sugar. And that allows the moisture that gets built up on the surface of the inner cover, or the surface of the cover inside the colony or in the hive, to drip down into the sugar, or any moisture at all that's made from that cluster that's below it, to be absorbed into that dry sugar. And that dry sugar will harden, almost like what some beekeepers do is make a candy board, for example. That candy board, or that dry sugar turning into a slight candy board, will become extra food, like a backup resource, right? And that's the key. Right, so not only you kill two birds with one stone, essentially, right? You've got a colony now that has good stores going into winter, but if they happen to start to run short as they get through winter, they can move up into that actual cluster or that clump of sugar and eat that sugar and make sure that they have enough stores. Now I'm going to come back and I'm going to remove the actual feeder inside the colony and make sure that that's not stuck in there through the winter, but that's just something that I do. Some people actually leave them in and then feed a fructose-based syrup throughout the winter. I don't care to do that. I don't want to enter any moisture whatsoever into that colony through the winter. So that's basically it. That's my first step here in the winter series. Please check in on our next series of videos, as we're going to show you how we continue to prep our colonies for winter, and our next step within the winterization process here. We go into the winter 2020 here at the Bohemia apiary, where beekeeping is definitely more than a hobby. It's definitely an obsession. Thanks for watching, everyone.